Uncle Lou, will you spend New Year's with me? Sorry, maybe next time. When I saw Michael Lou's reply, I wasn't surprised, but I was frustrated. I had just lost a bet. My friend Lily stretched out her hand excitedly. Pay up, you lost. Grumbling, I handed her my wallet. Fine. Guess I'll go clubbing with you tonight. Lily stared at me wide-eyed. Aren't you afraid he'll find out? I tilted my head and gave a mischievous grin. That's exactly the point. To get ready, Lily took me to her place to raid her closet. As she rummaged through clothes, she said, for clubbing, the less you wear, the better. Your stuff is way too tame. I pouted. All throughout high school, I wore almost nothing but my school uniform, and even on weekends, my outfits were always basic. I had a few fancier dresses I'd received as birthday gifts, but they were too delicate and special for just any night out. Lily held up a silver sequin camisole, sizing it up against me. We don't have time to shop, so you'll just have to wear this. I eyed the tiny top skeptically. Isn't it a little too revealing? Lily didn't give me a choice, practically shoving me into it. Revealing? Oh please, just put it on. After an hour of Lily's makeover skills, I finally looked at myself in the mirror. Beachy waves hair, smoky eye makeup, thin straps, and a mini skirt. I'd be unrecognizable. Lily squealed, practically vibrating with excitement. Jessie, you're gorgeous. Tonight, you're gonna steal the spotlight. I felt a spark of excitement, remembering Michael's rejection. It still stung, and I threw my arm around Lily, kissing her on the cheek. Tonight, we're going all out. We headed to the hottest bar in town. And even from the entrance to the dance floor, I had 5 or 6 guys asking for my number. Lily fended them off, whispering, have fun, but don't take these guys too seriously. She dragged me onto the dance floor, and we swayed to the music as countless eyes settled on us. Under the flashing lights, I felt the heat and thrill building up inside me. Suddenly, someone slipped an arm around my waist, their warm hand pressing against my stomach. Hey little one, isn't your stomach cold? I was ready to yell at this random guy, but when I looked up, I saw a dangerously familiar face. It was Uncle Neil. I froze, and he led me away from the dance floor to a curved bar. Arms crossed, Neil scanned me up and down, clicking his tongue. Jessie, you coming here and dressed like this? The music was so loud I could barely hear him. But my heart was racing. If Neil was here, then Michael must be here too. My face drained as I looked around, panicked. Neil leaned down, gently pinching my cheek. Sweetheart, look up at the second floor. I followed his gaze to the large glass window, where a faintly visible figure lounged on a couch. My stomach dropped as I recognized him instantly. I wanted to run. Neil turned me around and started walking toward the elevator. Come on. You're in for it now. I grabbed his hand, pleading. Uncle Neil, can't I just go home? He smirked at my expression. Nope. Michael wants to see you. Heart pounding. I followed Neil to the second floor. It was much quieter, with soft English music playing and tables for pool, creating a private hangout vibe. Passing through, Neil took me into a partly open room where I finally saw him, Michael. Sitting on the couch in a white shirt and black trousers. He turned his head slowly, his intense gaze sweeping over me, his brows furrowing. I quickly looked away, my nerves flaring. Neil cleared his throat. I'll leave you two alone. Bathroom break. I tried to hold him back, but he slipped away, and Michael's ice-cold voice cut through the quiet. Come here. I stood my ground, looking up at him defiantly. I'm 18 now. My voice shook, and his calm, indifferent expression only made me more nervous. Still, I held my head high, refusing to back down. Silence filled the air. Come here, Jessie. His tone softened just a little. I slowly moved closer. The couch was meant for two, and since he was seated in the middle, I had no choice but to stand in front of him. Michael's gaze swept down to my bare legs. Aren't you cold? I shook my head, trying to act tough, but suddenly, a sharp cramp twisted in my stomach, making me double over. Michael's voice was steady as he repeated, still not cold? I bit my lip. No, not at all. Tears welled up as the pain twisted through me like a blade, and sweat broke out on my forehead. Sighing, Michael bent down and lifted me onto his lap, letting me lean into him. His voice held a hint of exasperation. Your trouble, now that you're grown up. Sitting on his lap, I stiffened. momentarily forgetting the pain. The closeness brought back memories of him holding me as a child, soothing me when I was scared. 10 years ago, my parents' plane had gone missing. At just 8 years old, I went with my aunt to a hotel to wait for news. And that's where I first met Michael. He was waiting too. His parents had been on that flight. We comforted each other, hoping for a miracle. But the next morning, my aunt was nowhere to be found. Michael stayed with me, waiting until everyone else had left, but she never came back. He took me home with him, got permission from Grandpa Lou, and arranged for my adoption. From that day on, I became Grandpa Lou's adopted child, and Michael was my uncle. At first, I had nightmares every night. Monsters chased me, or I was grabbed by faceless figures. I'd cry alone in bed until one night during a thunderstorm, Michael found me and held me in his lap, gently comforting me. "Don't be scared, Jessie. I'll stay with you. I'll always be here." Though he wasn't as tall as my dad, his embrace was warm, with a faint scent of flowers, leaving even my nightmares tinged with sweetness. But as I grew older, he stopped holding me like that. He'd only pat my back until I drifted off, leaving after I'd fallen asleep. Through all those years, he was my everything. But he never understood my true feelings for him, feelings that were no longer just familial. Noticing my reaction, Michael quickly set me down on the opposite end of the couch. Just then, the door opened, and a woman stood there, clearly surprised. Neil slipped in after her, turning to Michael. "Told you I warned her." The woman came closer, throwing me a few unpleasant looks before turning to Michael. "Michael." Mr. Liu agreed to sign. Michael didn't respond. Instead, he looked at me. "Is your period early?" I held my stomach, thinking. I wasn't due until tomorrow. "Michael, Mr. Liu is ready to sign now. They're waiting at the Michelle Hotel." Her voice was cold, just as I remembered. She was Sarah, Michael's longtime secretary. Michael responded softly, "I know." As I was practically blacking out from the cramps, he took off his jacket. Draping it over me, he turned to Neil. "She's not feeling well. We're leaving." Neil raised his eyebrows. "Need a driver?" Michael lifted me in his arms, replying, "No, we'll manage." Sarah followed after us. "Michael, we need to get this contract signed tonight." Neil grabbed her arm, smiling. "The contract can wait. Jessie isn't feeling well. Why did she even come here?" As we stepped out, I heard her voice and suddenly remembered Lily. I called out, "Uncle Neil, my friend's still downstairs. Please let her know I've left." Neil called back, "Will do." Michael looked down at me. "Hold on to my neck and stay quiet." Obediently, I wrapped my arms around him and rested my head on his shoulder. Settling into the passenger seat, I shifted slightly only to feel a sudden warmth pooling between my legs. Terrified, I clenched my thighs. "Please, please don't leak." Michael glanced over, noticing my strange posture. He didn't say anything, but his expression turned darker. My denim miniskirt barely covered me as it was. It definitely wouldn't hold up for long. After a beat, I whispered, "Uncle Lou, I need a restroom." Michael acted like he hadn't heard, tossing his phone onto the console and adjusting his seat. Feeling ignored, I turned to look out the window, my fingers inching toward the door handle. Suddenly, he grabbed my wrist, saying, "Lift your hips." Not understanding, I just stared at him. He pulled his jacket from my shoulders and repeated, "Lift up." So I braced my hands against the car door and raised myself a little. Michael slipped his jacket under me, pressing me gently back down. "Don't worry about making a mess. You can go once we're home. But relax. You've had a bit to drink, just close your eyes and rest." His words softened me, and I leaned back, my body exhausted from being on edge. My hands and feet were freezing, and soon I started to feel the chills set in. After a sneeze, Michael turned off the AC and reached into the back, pulling out a blanket to hand to me. I took it, catching his hand briefly as I murmured, "Uncle Lou," but he pulled his hand back immediately. Lips pressed together, and started the car, his face as stern as ever. The rigid lines of his expression made it clear he was trying to hold back his anger. Michael angry was not something I ever wanted to see. Growing up, he'd been strict with me: no alcohol, no sleepovers, no clubs or bars, nothing remotely risky. When it came to academics, he was relentless. As a Cambridge graduate and CEO of Jesse Entertainment, he expected me to aim for an Ivy League school. I remembered once forgetting to log out of an online class and sneaking a mature movie. He caught me and made me do 5 extra calculus worksheets as punishment. Thinking about his lectures on safety, a chill ran down my spine. What if someone had spiked my drink or worse? The consequences could have been terrifying. I thought about apologizing right there. But I didn't want to distract him while he was driving. Instead, I pulled the blanket up around me, stealing glances at him, and then turned to look out at the blurred city lights passing by. What I didn't notice was the way he looked at me, his gaze dark, unreadable. When we finally got home, I jumped out of the car first, eager to rush inside. I made my way to the elevator as fast as my heels would allow, wobbling with each step. Michael followed me at a slow, steady pace. I heard the flick of a lighter and wrinkled my nose, wanting to put some distance between us. I hated it when he smoked. He'd never touched cigarettes or alcohol before. But after he started his company, he picked up both in no time. These days, he often came home with a faint smell of smoke and whiskey clinging to him. It wasn't that the smell was too strong, but my sensitive stomach made it hard to bear, and I'd nearly gag at the scent. After a few rounds of complaints, he'd started washing up before coming home. Now I never smelled smoke on him, but I did occasionally catch a whiff of a perfume I didn't recognize. I wondered idly who it belonged to as I walked, not paying attention to my step until my ankle twisted. My body tipped sideways, but an arm quickly wrapped around my waist. Steadying me, Michael looked down, brow furrowed, then bent and scooped me up. If you can't walk in heels, why wear such high ones? The faint smell of smoke hit my nose, and I wrinkled it, muttering, "It stinks." Michael gave a low chuckle, his chest rumbling with the sound. "You better get used to it." I covered my nose and mouth with one hand, mentally drawing little doodles of myself punching him. When we got to the apartment, he set me down and punched in the door code, then told me, "Those shoes? Toss them." I glanced down at my 3,000 yuan heels, feeling a bit reluctant, but I put them on the shoe rack and padded barefoot to my room. After changing into comfy pajamas, I gathered up my dirty clothes. I'd tossed the skirt, but Michael's suit jacket was a different story. One suit alone cost a small fortune, and the stains would need professional cleaning. Looking at the bloodstains, I sighed, pulling at my hair. What am I gonna do? I don't have enough to pay him back. A voice sounded behind me, low and amused. "Then break open your little piggy bank." I turned and saw Michael leaning against the door, arms crossed. He'd changed into a dark V-neck sweater and matching pants, one leg slightly bent. His whole look casual and relaxed. I pouted. "There's hardly anything in it. It's not even full yet." He was so rich, why did he care about my piggy bank? Catching my tone, Michael smirked slightly, hand over the clothes. Not wanting him to see the stains, I suddenly hugged the jacket close. "I'll clean it myself, okay?" Michael studied me for a second before shrugging. "Fine. I've made some hot cocoa." Wrapped in a blanket, I sat on the couch, waiting. Soon he handed me the mug, and I remembered he always seemed to be around whenever I had cramps, making me cocoa without fail. After drinking most of it, I glanced up at Michael, who had settled down beside me. "Do you have any candy?" He was flipping through a magazine, but he looked up, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Aren't you a bit old for candy?" I traced my fingers along the edge of the glass, feeling a bit disappointed. "Oh, but aren't I still a kid to you?" I cast a shy glance his way, watching as his soft hair fell forward, and the warm glow from the lamp softened his features. Lost in the moment, I finished the cocoa and got up to wash the cup, but Michael stopped me. "Leave it. Time for you to get some sleep." I put the cup down and hesitated, then asked softly, "Could you stay with me tonight?" As soon as the words left my mouth, my face heated up. Why did I say that? Michael closed his magazine, setting it aside to look at me seriously. "What did you say?" I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten, but I forced myself to repeat, "Will you sleep with me?" Maybe it was the lingering effects of the alcohol, but tonight I felt bolder than usual. Michael watched me, his gaze calm yet intense, like a smoldering flame. Just as I thought I'd collapse under the weight of his stare, he finally said, "You're old enough now. You can start dating if you want." My mind went blank. I looked up at him stunned. He went on, "When you go to college, I won't stand in your way." He hesitated slightly, looking unsure before he added, "Just make sure to protect yourself, all right?" My brain stalled, and I just stared at him in a daze. Michael seemed to interpret my silence as embarrassment and smiled gently. "I don't have much advice to give. Whoever you like, that's up to you." My heart felt like it was sinking into a bottomless pit, and I couldn't hold back as I blurted out, "The person I like is you, Michael." Just like every other time I'd said it, he looked at me with a kind, calm expression, his eyes warm but distant. In the past, I could face his indifference with determination, but maybe growing up had changed that. Feeling the ache in my chest, I quickly looked away, swiping at the tears gathering at the corners of my eyes. It hurt, but I couldn't say anything. Michael reached over, patting my head twice. "I'm only your uncle. All right, go get some sleep." The next morning, Michael was already gone. But he'd left breakfast in the kitchen. He'd made crepes my favorite. They tasted sweet, but I felt an ache inside. He always used family as a way to distance himself. It made me feel powerless. I scrolled through my phone while eating, noticing there were no new messages from Lily. Feeling a bit concerned, I dialed her number. But to my surprise, Neil picked up. I froze, my mind racing as I struggled to breathe. Neil's voice was full of guilt. "Jesse, please don't get mad. Just stay calm." My voice shook as I asked, "Did you and Lily spend the night together?" Neil took a deep breath and answered, "Yes." I slammed my phone down, screamed into my pillow, threw on some clothes, and stormed over to Jesse Entertainment. I'd tell Michael and let him deal with Neil. I stopped at the entrance to Michael's company, hesitating on whether I should call him. The automatic doors opened, and a receptionist with a sweet face approached me. "Hello, may I ask who you are?" "I'm here to see Michael," I replied without hesitation. Hearing the boss's name, she looked surprised but kept her smile. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Liu?" I frowned. "I don't need one. He knows me." She raised an eyebrow, her voice polite but firm. "Sorry. Everyone needs an appointment." Ignoring her, I took a step forward, but she grabbed my wrist, her tone cold. "Ma'am, please come with me to check in. You'll need an appointment before seeing Mr. Liu." She led me to the reception desk, where she picked up the phone and spoke briefly before asking, "Your name?" "Jesse Liu." She paused, a subtle smirk tugging at her lips. While talking on the phone, she glanced my way a few times before hanging up. "Mr. Liu is currently in a meeting. You'll need to wait here." "I'll wait upstairs," I said, heading toward the elevators. She raised a hand to block me. "Sorry, but you'll have to wait here. Everyone is busy upstairs." With a patronizing smile, she added, "Just wait here if you have no other business." She turned and returned to her desk, leaving me standing there. Frustrated, I headed to a small sofa in the corner. After an hour, I went back to check, but the answer was still he's in a meeting. Eventually, I fell asleep on the sofa, only to wake up shivering from the air conditioning. It was already 8:32 p.m., and my legs and arms had gone numb from the cold. I rubbed my hands together to warm up just as the doors opened, and a group of people entered. Michael was at the front. Our eyes met, and he stopped abruptly, the people behind him nearly colliding into him. Noticing his focus, they followed his gaze toward me. I forced a bitter smile. So, they'd really just left me down here. The receptionist hurried over, greeting him with "Mr. Liu," before turning to me sharply. "You're still here? I told you appointments only. Please come back tomorrow." I looked at Michael, my voice dry. "Michael, weren't you in a meeting upstairs?" People around us looked on, some in shock, others with smirks or contempt, probably thinking I was just another girl with a hopeless crush on Michael. Michael approached, his voice cool. "When did you get here?" Before I could answer, the receptionist spoke up. "She's been here since this afternoon. I told Ms. Sarah, but she said you were busy, so..." Michael's gaze dropped to my icy hands, and his expression darkened. He turned back to the receptionist, his voice cold. "So, you left her sitting here the whole time?" The receptionist's face turned pale, and she stammered, "I didn't mean..." Ignoring her, Michael took my hand, putting his arm around my shoulder as he guided me to the executive elevator. With every step, A wave of pain shot up from my legs, and I could see Michael's frown deepen. Just as he looked like he might carry me, I whispered, "I don't need you to carry me." Inside the elevator, he released me, and I sighed, pouting. "Sure, I can call you, but what about everyone else? I might have special treatment now, but what about in the future?" Michael's brow furrowed. "And your secretary? She told me you were in a meeting, so I waited all this time." "Sarah?" I puffed out my cheeks, saying nothing but my irritation obvious. As I was lost in thought, the elevator chimed and the doors opened. Michael took my hand as we stepped out, and right away, we ran into Sarah and a couple of colleagues. Sarah's gaze frosted over the second she saw me, only warming slightly as she looked at Michael. "Michael, you're back." He nodded, but she called out, "Who is she?" I gave her a small, sweet smile, tilting my head. "It's me, Aunt Sarah. Don't you recognize me?" Silence fell. At Aunt Sarah, her face went red then pale. "What did you just call me?" Michael quickly apologized on my behalf and tugged me into his office. Leaning against the arm of the couch, I chuckled at the memory of Sarah's stunned face. Biting my lip, I called out playfully, "Michael." He froze, almost spilling the glass of water he was pouring as he turned to frown at me. I met his eyes, clenching my fists as I muttered sourly, "She calls you by name so warmly, doesn't she? Uncle Lou?" Michael stood by the water cooler, his gaze fixed on me, dark and intense. Feeling uncomfortable under his stare, I turned my head, focusing on the reason I'd come here in the first place. Straightening up, I cleared my throat and said, "Neil took my friend somewhere. I think he tricked her into going to bed with him." Michael walked over, handing me the water, a crease forming between his brows. "Are you certain?" I nodded firmly, and after a moment, he chuckled softly. "Neil's not interested in kids." The words hit me like a punch. My grip on the glass slipped, hot water spilling onto my hand, though I hardly felt it. "Kids?" I stared at him. "So both of us are just kids to you?" Way to confirm my worst fears. Michael, halfway through unbuttoning his shirt, paused, his hand stopping on the buttons. "Yes. In our eyes, you're both still kids." The words felt like slaps, leaving my head spinning. How many times now? Every time, it was the same. The humiliation sank in, and I lowered my gaze, clenching my hands into tight fists. "Jesse." I stepped forward, grabbed the front of his shirt, and standing on my tiptoes, pressed my lips to his, filled with a mix of anger and resolve. It wasn't a kiss. It was more like a collision. The moment my lips met his, it felt like fireworks exploding in my mind. A spine-tingling shiver surged down my back, and my whole body felt weak. My lips stung as tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and in less than 2 seconds, I pulled away, gasping, my whole body shaking. Slowly, I looked up at him. Michael's face was cold, his fingers firmly gripping my wrist, creating distance between us. He looked at me with that familiar detached, almost regal expression. "This isn't something you're allowed to do, Jesse." I let out a small, bitter laugh, forcing back the tears that were about to spill over. "But Sarah can, right?" Michael looked momentarily shocked, but I gave him one last glance before turning and leaving. After leaving the office, I didn't go home. 4 days later, I was still hiding out in a hotel when the manager showed up with the police. They asked if I was Jesse. Startled, I quickly confirmed my name, age, and handed over my ID and other relevant documents. The officer asked gently, "Your family reported you missing. Where have you been these past few days? Did someone trick you?" I gave a bitter smile. "No, I've been here in my hotel room. I just needed some time to myself." Seeing that I wasn't much older than a teenager, they probably assumed I'd been taken advantage of. They brought me to the station to sort things out. When we arrived, Michael was already there. The second I saw him, that familiar ache hit me, and I instinctively moved to hide behind the officer. Michael quickly walked over, his voice filled with worry. "Jesse." I slowly stepped out from behind the officer, managing a faint, forced smile. "Uncle Lou." Michael paused, his expression momentarily softening in surprise before he returned to his usual calm demeanor. An hour later, we left the station in silence. Back at home, I tried to slip away to my room, but suddenly, Michael's arms wrapped around me from behind. I froze, a surge of warmth and tingling spreading over my body as his chin rested on the back of my head. His breath warm against my hair. Taking a shaky breath, I fought to keep my voice steady. What are you doing? He tightened his hold on me, his voice low and slightly hoarse. Don't ever scare me like that again, okay? I bit my lip, squirming. Who scared you? Let go. This wasn't fair. He could hug me like this, but I couldn't do the same to him? Frustrated, I struggled. Let go of me, Michael. But his arms only tightened around me, and I could hear his uneven breathing. His voice had an unusual tone, almost like he was crying. I stilled, listening to his heartbeat against my back. And then softly he whispered, "Don't ever leave me without a word again." With that, he slumped against me, and as my hand moved to his forehead, the heat of his skin startled me. Oh no, he had a fever. It had rained for the past few days. But the weather wasn't cold. How did he end up with a fever? Had he been out in the rain this whole time? Looking down at Michael lying on the bed, his face flushed and his breath heavy, I felt a stab of panic. Did you take any medicine? I'll get a thermometer and a damp cloth to cool you down. Michael suddenly grabbed my hand. I took some already. Gently, I pried his hand away and tucked it under the blanket. Speaking firmly, then stay here while I get a wet cloth, all right? Sitting on the bed, I cradled his face as I wiped it down, folding the damp cloth to place on his forehead. He let out a soft, faint sigh from his throat. How did you end up with a fever? After a long pause, I finally asked the question weighing on my mind. Michael closed his eyes, his voice quiet. I was out looking for you without an umbrella. I bit my lip and looked down. You were searching for me this whole time? He gave a tired his voice heavy with exhaustion. Haven't slept for days, and I got caught in the rain, so here we are. An unfamiliar, complex feeling swelled up in my chest, and I looked down, sinking into silence. Michael's hand brushed my wrist, and he said, "Jesse, no matter how mad you are, don't turn off your phone or leave without a word." I turned away, saying nothing. Jesse, the knot of emotions in my chest tightened until I couldn't take it anymore. I burst out, "How long are you going to keep controlling me? Didn't you say you wanted me to get a boyfriend? That you wanted me to move out?" Michael froze, lifting his head to cover his eyes with his arm, a bitter smile on his lips. "I just wanted you to have more options." Frustrated, I clenched the bedsheet. "I've always had only one option, so why do you keep rejecting me?" He rubbed his forehead, his brows furrowed, even in his feverish state, still looking as handsome as ever. It was a while before he looked at me and said, "We're not suitable for each other, Jesse. The age gap is too big. And there's the matter of me being your uncle. I can't let you get the wrong idea. And I certainly can't lead you into making the wrong choice." He paused before adding, "Jesse, I just want to protect you." I stayed up all night taking care of Michael, and by morning his fever had gone down. But then, I came down with one myself. Lily and Neil came to visit, looking every bit like a couple in love, which annoyed me so much that, despite my fever, I scrambled up to interrogate them. "Lily, did he force you? Don't be afraid, tell me, and I'll handle him," I said as I grabbed Neil by the collar, my temper flaring. Lily's wide eyes stared back, her smile lighting up as she hugged me, explaining, "Jesse, it's not like that. I'm the one who flirted with him." I looked at my best friend in disbelief. How did she go from innocent to completely different after one night out? Refusing to believe it, I kept a tight hold on Neil's shirt, accusing him. "Neil, you're the worst. You switch girlfriends so quickly, why mess with my friend? You're a total scumbag." Wait. Neil pinned me back against my pillow, then turned to Michael with a look of horror. "Jesse thinks I'm a player?" I yelled back, "Yes. Uncle Neil, you're a total player." Lily looked back and forth between us, confusion clouding her big eyes. She finally settled her gaze on Neil. "I think I need an explanation." Neil, looking desperate, grabbed her hands, explaining patiently, "Baby, I'm not a player. I told you all about my dating history last night. It's nothing like Jesse says." "Michael, back me up here." Michael, who had been watching with his arms crossed, chuckled and bent down to tuck me back into bed, giving my fevered cheeks a little squeeze. He turned to Lily. "Neil's not the type to mess around. Jesse's mistaken." I pouted, looking up at Michael, and racked my foggy brain. Had I misremembered? Maybe it was a misunderstanding from when I was little. Neil was always kind to girls, and I must have assumed he liked them all. With the misunderstanding cleared up, the two lovebirds cuddled up again, making me envious. But I felt much better, and by afternoon my fever had broken. As they were leaving, Neil suddenly turned to me. "Kiddo, be brave." "Michael, actually." He left the sentence hanging. "Actually what?" I pressed, intrigued. Neil just smiled, then left with Lily. After they left, Sarah arrived to report to Michael. For the first time, she actually showed some concern for me. "Jessie, are you feeling any better?" Keeping my expression neutral, I responded distractedly before heading back to my room, leaving her to enter the study with Michael. Lying on my bed, I kept an eye on the clock. They'd been in the study for 40 minutes now. The silence in there left me with an uneasy feeling. After fidgeting for a while, I finally shuffled out to the living room and turned on the TV. Barely 10 minutes later, the study door opened, and I immediately sat up straight. Sarah stepped out, glancing at me briefly, before heading straight to the bathroom. I watched her, noticing that she was now wearing just a thin white blouse instead of the suit jacket she'd had on earlier. Yes, it was summer, and yes, it was hot outside. But the air conditioning at home was always on, and Michael's study was kept as cold as a freezer. I usually avoided going in there myself. What had they been doing that required her to take off her jacket? My mind spun with suspicion. I tossed the remote aside and headed for the study door. I was about to open it when Sarah's voice stopped me. "Michael's in a call. Don't interrupt." I turned to face her, my eyes drawn to her blouse. The top two buttons were undone, not the first, but the second and third. With the way her shirt billowed, you could see a hint of the lace beneath from certain angles. Flustered and angry, I looked away, my cheeks heating up. Was she doing this on purpose? Noticing my reaction, Sarah glanced down and, realizing the buttons were undone, fastened them quickly. Then she looked back at me with a clear, spiteful gleam in her eyes. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you cause?" I glared at her, stunned. "What?" The hatred in Sarah's eyes was unmistakable. "Because of you, he's compromised so many times. The first time, he turned down a job abroad. The second, he let your aunt manipulate him into sending her money. The third, he rejected countless women who wanted to be with him, even going against his father's wishes. He's done so much for you, yet you live so carelessly and obliviously." Her accusations left me speechless. "Maybe it's time you thought about what you've taken for granted." With that, she turned and walked back into the study, closing the door behind her, as if shutting me out from another world. I walked to the balcony, sliding down to sit against the wall, Sarah's words playing over and over in my mind. A pair of gray slippers appeared beside me, and Michael's voice broke the silence. "What are you doing sitting out here?" I heard him but didn't answer. Michael slid down to sit beside me, his knee brushing against my leg. "What's wrong?" I turned to him slowly. "You and her, in there, what were you doing?" The question caught in my throat, as if something were choking me, the words almost too painful to ask. Michael's reply came quickly. "She spilled coffee on her shirt. We were talking about work, nothing else." I felt a wave of relief, but it was clouded by a heavier emotion. "You gave up a job, let my aunt take advantage of you, and never told me. Why?" His gaze softened. "Because I adopted you, and I didn't want you to suffer because of it." Tears pricked my eyes as I yelled, "Then why didn't you just let me go? You could have left me with anyone else." Michael looked at me, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. I couldn't bear to. I was stunned, biting down hard on my lip as I fought to control the emotions about to spill over. Taking a deep breath, I looked at him and asked one last time, "Michael, do you love me? Tell me the truth. Don't lie." He stayed silent for a long moment before he finally said, "I do." I swallowed, my heart pounding. "Then can we be together?" He took a deep breath, his voice so quiet it almost vanished. "I'm sorry, Jessie." I laughed bitterly, covering my face as tears slipped down my cheeks, my heart aching with every word. What I wanted wasn't his apology. Time flew by, and graduation was just around the corner. One Friday after class, as I was heading to the dorms with my classmates, I heard someone call out, "Jessie, wait up." It was David from the neighboring department. My classmates exchanged knowing glances. Everyone was aware of his pursuit of me. "What's up?" I asked as he approached. David, with his handsome features and cheerful demeanor, smiled at us. "There's an art exhibition this afternoon. Want to join me?" "Sorry, it's a family birthday today. I need to head home," I explained. It was my great-grandfather's birthday, and I'd promised Michael I'd be there for dinner. David looked disappointed but quickly offered, "Then let me give you a ride." Before I could refuse, my classmate nudged me, answering for me, "That'd be great." Jesse was just thinking about taking a taxi. David and I had met at the freshman New Year's party. He was the host, I was a performer. He confessed to me after the show, but I turned him down, explaining I already had someone I liked. Since then, he'd been a constant, quiet presence, waiting despite knowing there was no hope. But I too was waiting for someone. A few months into my freshman year, I approached Grandpa Lou about dissolving the adoption. His initial anger led him to believe Michael had put me up to it. He summoned Michael home and beat him severely, warning him to abandon his selfish thoughts. It was then I realized Michael only hid his feelings in my presence. That day, I left home in tears, moved into the university dorms, and tried to focus solely on my studies, pushing thoughts of Michael aside. But I never gave up on persuading Grandpa. Finally, last year on my parents' death anniversary, Grandpa agreed to my request at their graveside. He gave both Michael and me our freedom. But when I stood before Michael with the adoption dissolution papers, declaring, "We no longer have any familial ties," I didn't see the smile I'd hoped for. Instead, his eyes rimmed red, his lips quivering. He looked as vulnerable as an abandoned child. In that moment, I understood what Lily had once told me. Michael's insistence on maintaining distance might stem from an unshakable belief. For you too, who had lost your parents, nothing was more precious than family bonds. To Michael, romantic love was fleeting, like flowers that wither after a brief, brilliant bloom. Family ties, however, were eternal. He didn't want to see that withering end, didn't want your story to be so transient. David dropped me off at the Lou family home. As I turned to leave, he called out, "Jesse, are you still going to wait?" I nodded firmly, a smile playing on my lips. "I have no reason not to." David's eyes flickered, words unspoken on his lips. I knew what he wanted to say. "David," I said softly, "don't wait for me anymore. I won't turn back. He's always been the one in my heart." A flicker of sadness crossed David's face before he broke into a grin. "I understand, Jesse. Happy birthday to your family member. I hope all your wishes come true." As I watched his car disappear, I turned towards the house. Looking up, I froze. Michael was standing on the roof, gazing down at me. My heart raced. How long had he been there? Had he heard what I'd said? Though I could bare my heart to others, I was utterly timid before him. I feared that if he'd heard those words, he'd once again look as vulnerable as if the whole world had abandoned him. I quickly composed myself. "Where's Grandpa?" I called up to him. Michael just stared at me silently, as if seeing me for the first time. Just as my neck began to ache from looking up, he turned away. "He's inside, waiting for you." I went in to see Grandpa. His health had deteriorated, and sometimes in his confusion, he'd mistake me for his sister-in-law. Each time, I wanted to just go along with it, but Michael's presence always stopped me. Over the years, Grandpa had gradually accepted that his brother and sister-in-law were never coming back. Feeling emotional as Grandpa reminisced, I quietly slipped out and walked to the family's small orchard. The May apricots were still green. I couldn't resist plucking one to taste. Suddenly, I spotted a figure ahead. Michael stood under a Chinese tune tree, tall and graceful, his dark eyes captivating. Just his quiet presence made my heart flutter. Our eyes met in silence. It felt like there was so much to say, yet we couldn't find the words. We let the moment stretch on, time slipping away. Eventually, Michael spoke, making small talk before heading down the mountain as the sun began to set. As we descended, Michael walked ahead. I found myself reaching out, tracing the outline of his broad back with my hands. In a moment of boldness, I jumped onto his back, wrapping my legs around him tightly. Burying my face in his neck, I whispered, "Uncle, carry me." Michael stood still for what felt like an eternity. Just as I was about to give up, He gently hooked his arms under my legs and began to walk. The path was short, less than 5 minutes, but to me it felt like a lifetime. When I slid off his back, my eyes were brimming with tears. He reached out to wipe them away but stopped short. On the way back, we discussed my plans to study abroad. I eagerly accepted his suggestions, and we talked about potential universities and majors. Between us, we could discuss anything, except our feelings. 2 months after graduation, I was set to leave for England. Lily and Neil, now married, came to see me off at the airport. Next time I'm back, you'll probably have a little one to greet me, I teased. Lily burst into tears, hugging me tightly. Don't make it sound like you'll be gone forever. You'll be back for holidays, right? Neil comforted her, then turned to me. Take care of yourself over there, Jessie. I hope everything goes smoothly. I hugged Neil too, playfully adding, thanks, Uncle Neil. Take good care of my Aunt Lily. Lily punched me lightly, her eyes full of reluctance to part. I smiled gently at her. Neil cradled her face, softly wiping away her tears. Happy people cry easily. Perhaps because there's always someone there to dry their tears. As it was time for me to go through security, Michael, who had been silent, handed me my luggage. Go on, Jessie, he said simply. I nodded, took the luggage, and turned to leave. A few steps away, I heard Neil's voice. She left without even a hug, Michael. You're so cold-hearted. I kept walking, not looking back. Lily called my name, and when I didn't turn, she seemed to cry again, with Neil comforting her. They said something else, but I was too far to hear. The night before, Michael and I had had an honest conversation. Pointing to a small, bright star, I'd said, Michael, I can't deny the various roles you've played in my life. Sometimes a father, an uncle, a brother. But those were all childhood feelings. Now, I'm clear about my feelings for you. It's not familial love, I like you. And it's instinctual. Can you understand that? Michael had nodded. I understand. I'd smiled and continued, I'll study hard abroad. You once said that if I hadn't chosen anyone else by 30, you'd agree to be with me. Does that promise still stand? It does, he'd replied firmly. I smiled softly after getting this answer, walked to him, stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the cheek. Michael, I will surpass your achievements. Make you look at me with new eyes. Make you unable to ignore me. And make you unable to help but come to me. I moved to the end of the line, swallowing the ache in my chest and resisting the urge to turn around. The first time he confessed, he gave me a choice. The second time I gave him a choice. I don't know how much longer I have to wait to see him walk toward me, fully resolved. With no hesitation. What I want isn't just an embrace. I want him to be completely sure that he wants me. It's my 3rd year here in the UK, and I've made a lot of friends from home. We usually get together on weekends to cook Chinese food. British food can be so unappetizing that I often find myself awake in the middle of the night, missing Chinese food, wiping away tears as I force myself to try new recipes. I've come a long way from a total novice to someone who can cook up a whole table of dishes. But over the last 2 months, I haven't been joining the gatherings, as my master's program has started. Now my life is just school and home, back and forth like clockwork. This Saturday, I'd just reached the library when Lily sent me a video call. I quickly ducked into the garden to answer. On the screen was her familiar round face, her deer-like eyes even brighter than before. The camera jiggled as Lily grinned with excitement. Jessie, guess where I am right now? Her smile was infectious, and I couldn't help but laugh back. Out traveling? She nodded eagerly, practically bouncing. Guess where? I squinted, trying to make out the scene behind her, which looked vaguely familiar. The UK? Yes, she squealed, and the camera spun as she moved, briefly showing Neil's face. Jessie, he greeted me. I smiled politely. Hi, Uncle Neil. Still as handsome as ever. Neil frowned slightly. Stop calling me uncle. You're making me feel old. I couldn't help but laugh, and after a bit more banter, the phone went back to Lily. Jessie, let's meet up. I miss you so much. Looking down at the dappled shadows on the ground, I murmured, sure, how about tonight? I'm at the library right now. Lily's face lit up. Perfect. Send me your address, and we'll come find you. After that call, I could barely concentrate. My mind kept drifting to the time Lily and I spent studying and living together. and soon enough, I found myself staring blankly at my old chat history with Michael. The last time we talked was a week ago, when I sent him some questions. I'd chosen the same major as him, economics and management. These 3 years I've hardly been back to China. It's not that I don't want to go. I just fear that if I go back, I won't be able to leave again. And Michael's gotten busier and busier. His company keeps expanding, with meetings and events that never seem to end. He doesn't post on social media or use any other apps. So the only way to hear about him is through Lily. Sometimes she tells me about him, but it's always the same. She says he's still a workaholic and still single, so I shouldn't worry. But how can I not worry? Time drags on so slowly, and I'm terrified he's already drifting away. I stayed at the library until 4 p.m. But I barely read 10 pages. I finally packed up and headed out to meet Lily. When I saw her at the restaurant, her face was round and rosy, proof of how well she was being taken care of. She told me this trip to the UK was just the first stop, and they'd be moving on in a few days. I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. That sounds amazing. Neil casually offered, "Why don't you join us?" I shook my head. No way. I'm not going to be a third wheel. Lily winked. Well, call Michael over, and we can all go on vacation together. I shook my head and managed a faint bittersweet smile. Lily took my hand seriously. You have no idea, do you? He misses you so much it's driving him crazy. Neil says he checks the UK weather every day, worrying about you, asking me for updates in secret. Hearing her say this, I suddenly found it hard to breathe. I interrupted her. Lily, please don't mention him. I miss him so much. I took a deep breath, calming myself, and looked out the window. Across the wide street, under the glow of a street lamp, someone was standing there. Tall and lean in a khaki trench coat, his face intense. He was looking quietly in my direction, as if he'd been there a while. Lily followed my gaze and gasped, "Oh my God, it's Michael." She grabbed my hand, shaking it in excitement, then frantically turned to Neil. Did you see him? Tell me I'm not dreaming. Neil stayed calm, gently pressing her back into her seat and said, Jessie, go meet him. I stood frozen for a long moment, and finally, with their encouragement, I got up, dashed out of the restaurant, and crossed the street. Panting, I looked up at Michael, my eyes growing misty. I opened my mouth to speak, but he pulled me into his arms before I could say anything. Jessie, he said softly, it's been too long. For a second, I was stunned. Then I buried my face in his coat, a thrill of excitement running through me, and murmured a soft We hugged for what felt like forever, until my phone rang in my pocket. I pulled away, glancing at the caller ID to see it was Lily. Michael saw it too and smiled. Let's head back inside. Once we returned to the restaurant, even after the food arrived, I couldn't stop glancing at him, as if I still needed to make sure he was really there. Lily was full of questions, grilling Michael about why he'd come to the UK, and how he'd known we'd be at that particular restaurant. Before he could answer, Neil admitted the whole thing, confessing that he'd given Michael all the details. You came on the same flight as us? Lily asked in surprise. Michael nodded. Lily glanced at me, her surprise quickly turning into a knowing smile. Oh, I blinked in confusion, still lingering in the moment he first appeared. After dinner, Neil and Lily took a cab back to their hotel. Michael offered to walk me home, though he'd soon have to catch his flight back to China. The thought of him leaving made my heart sink. This brief meeting, was it a blessing or a curse? It felt like he'd handed me a piece of candy. I'd unwrapped it, savoring a moment of sweetness, only to have it turn sour, settling deeply in my chest. When we reached my building, I stopped and told him, I'll head up on my own. You should hurry to the airport. Michael froze, looking intently at me, his voice soft with concern. Are you all right? I mustered a smile and lifted my chin. I'm fine. You'd better go. But as soon as I spoke, something slipped down my cheek. I quickly lowered my head and wiped at my face, only to feel the tears coming faster. His voice was filled with concern as he called out, Jessie. I couldn't take it any longer and slowly turned around, my small smile already gone. Trying to sound steady, I reassured myself more than him. It's fine, Michael. I'm fine. Go on. I'll focus on my studies. I wanted to walk away, but my legs felt heavy, as if weighed down with lead. Clutching my clothes tightly, I forced myself to say things I didn't really mean. Please, don't just show up like this again. Or if you must, then come to me in a dream. Not like this. Appearing and leaving so suddenly. I'll wait until I'm 30. I'll be good. My throat tightened, and tears began rolling down my cheeks, one after another, as if a thread had snapped, leaving me breathless and my chest feeling painfully tight. From behind, Michael wrapped his arms around me, gently resting his head on my shoulder. His voice was rough with emotion. I'm sorry. This time, I just couldn't wait any longer. Michael sat in my little apartment on a small single-seater sofa, his tall frame making it look cramped. I sat across from him on a low stool, shorter by half, sipping lemon water with him. Earlier, we'd had a dramatic moment outside the apartment building. I covered my face, wailing, while he held me from behind, quietly crying. We stood there, lost in each other, ignoring everyone around us. Until a passerby finally asked if we were okay. Embarrassed, I'd quickly grabbed Michael and dashed into the apartment. After calming down, I started replaying his words in my head, going over each part to confirm what he truly meant. When you said you couldn't wait to see me, was that because you missed me? Michael put down his glass and looked at me with a calm, steady gaze. Yes. And you like me? Yes. I like you. I took another sip of water, set down the glass, then licked my lips as I looked at him. Is it more than just like? Michael suddenly stood up, walked over to me, and knelt down so we were eye to eye. His features seemed etched in ink, and my heart raced wildly. He looked at me seriously, his eyes shining with an undeniable light. It's more than that. I love you, Jesse. I want to be with you. Slowly, I lowered my head, emotions overwhelming me, and bit down on my lip. I kept telling myself, be happy. Don't cry. Don't cry. But the tears came anyway, sliding down my cheeks one by one. Michael gently cupped my face, wiping away each tear with his thumb, over and over. I love you, Jesse. His eyes held 1,000 stars, bright and unwavering. You won't regret this? You won't regret it, will you, Michael? I asked, my voice trembling. The only regret I have is making you wait so long. Michael held my hand, his smile pained. I'm nearly 40 now. I was afraid I'd miss my chance. I buried myself in his arms, crying for a long time, asking him to confirm it again and again. And each time, he answered me sincerely, no, I won't. The next day, Michael and I bought tickets and flew back home. On the plane, he suddenly pulled a wax paper package out of his bag. It looked like the wrapping for pastries, and the familiar scent hit me instantly. Michael held the package carefully in one hand and gently unwrapped it, revealing flower-shaped cookies. They were my favorite cookies. The petal shapes were crushed from being packed tightly. Michael's cheeks reddened as he said, a little embarrassed, I'm not sure how they'll taste after a few days. Want to try one? I picked up a piece and took a bite, my eyes gradually filling with tears. How could they not taste good? He'd remembered exactly what I loved. Seeing my eyes redden, Michael quickly put down the cookies and brushed my eyes with the back of his hand. Why the tears again? I pressed my lips together, the ache in my heart nearly overwhelming. Michael wrapped his arm around me gently, one hand cradling the back of my head as he softly reassured me. It's okay, it's okay. Everything's all right now. At 3 p.m., Michael and I were at the Civil Affairs Bureau, filling out paperwork. I was so excited and nervous that I could barely hold the pen. It took a while, but I finally managed to finish. Michael also ran into a bit of trouble. The clerk kept confirming his age. Are you really 36? I nearly burst out laughing, quickly turning away to hide my smile, then looked back at him. Michael remained calm, confirming twice, yes, I'm 37. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I turned to the clerk with a mischievous look and asked, he looks young, doesn't he? Realizing her mistake, the clerk smiled sheepishly. Yes, he looks like he's in his late 20s. Very young. I joined in, and handsome too. The clerk nodded. Oh, absolutely. He looks like someone out of a TV show. With a face like that, he could be in movies. They make a lot of money. I laughed so hard I nearly tipped over, and Michael supported me, politely thanking the clerk. Thank you. When we left with our marriage certificate, I rubbed my belly, I'd laughed so hard it hurt. I suppose the age gap really does bring its own funny moments. Sitting in the car, I rubbed my stomach while watching Michael turn the marriage certificate over and over. His face so joyful that fine lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes. Uncle Lou, are you really that happy? I am. If you're so happy, then give me a kiss. Michael froze for a moment, his face flushing instantly as he carefully put the certificates away, then gripped the steering wheel, preparing to drive. Seeing how reserved he was, I cupped his face and gave him a deep kiss, tracing the shape of his lips. I didn't stop until I heard him swallow. Then, with a mischievous grin, I pulled back, seeing the spark igniting in his eyes. Michael's Adam's apple moved slightly as he reached over, holding the back of my neck. His voice was low and affectionate. Behave. We're in public. What's there to be afraid of? I pressed a finger to his lips, my eyes curving into a playful smile as I looked at him. Michael, you're finally mine. Michael gazed at me, his eyes tracing my face inch by inch, then leaned down and kissed me. This kiss wasn't gentle. It was intense, prying my lips open, his tongue chasing and teasing mine, exploring hungrily. After a while he pulled back slowly, trailing his lips to my neck. In my ear, he murmured over and over, I've always been yours. Tears welled up in my eyes again, and I wrapped my arms tightly around his neck, nodding firmly as I whispered, let's go home. The end.